Call this meeting to order. Welcome everyone to the 81st meeting number 81 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. I'm going to read through some of the things many of us have heard many times over the last number of years. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Therefore, some people are in person, some are on Zoom. I'll just make a couple of comments for the benefit of the witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you before speaking. And when speaking, please try and speak clearly and slowly. And for those online, please mute yourself when you are not speaking. All comments should be directed through the chair. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand and you will be recognized. For interpretation online, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. We have the same things here, Ambassador, for you. There's an earpiece, and you can choose English or French translation, just so you're aware. For the sake of our translators, please no yelling or loud noises into the microphone, and try not to speak close to the microphone with your earpiece, as I was almost doing there, because that can cause feedback. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, November 2nd, the committee is resuming its study of the subject matter of Bill C-57, an act to implement the 2023 trade agreement between Canada and the Ukraine. Today we have with us from the Embassy of Ukraine, Her Excellency Yulia Kovalev, the Ambassador of Ukraine to Canada. I hope I pronounced your name properly. And welcome, Ambassador, and we would like you to begin our committee today with some opening remarks. We usually give about 5 minutes, but I think you can take more time if you would like, and the committee would be fine with that.
Thank you. Distinguished Chair, honorable members of the Parliament, members of the committee, it's my honor to be today with you and to talk about the importance of the modernized free trade agreement between Ukraine and Canada. This agreement is more than just a trade agreement. It is a testament of the deepening of our bilateral relations. It's a symbol of Canada's economic support to Ukraine and Ukraine's economic resistance amid unprovoked and unjustified Russian aggression against Ukraine. The negotiations to modernize free trade agreements started in January 2022, just a month before Russian full-scale invasion started. And that was the time when Russia has already started to build their troops near Ukrainian borders. Since then, the negotiation team has been working around the clock, despite missile attacks, power disruptions, sometimes during the bombardment from the bomb shelters. And this underscores our unwavering commitment to booster our economic ties and to lay the ground for Ukraine reconstruction and Canadian companies to participate in Ukrainian reconstructions. Russian war against Ukraine already caused damage to Ukrainian economy, which is over $411 billion, according to the latest estimation of the World Bank. And unfortunately, this figure is growing every day. Sectors like infrastructure, energy, agriculture, social services suffer the most. Infrastructure has been disseminated, energy facilities has been targeted, bridges and roads destroyed, and entire cities and villages left in ruins. The rebuilding of Ukraine represents one of the most substantial reconstruction and modernization effort on the European continent in years to come. And Ukraine's approach to rebuilding can be summarized as in building better. The Ukraine's rebuilding will be possible with the participation of the international business. And the free trade agreement with Canada, modernized free trade agreement, paves the way for Canadian companies to participate in Ukraine's rebuilding. Ukraine needs Canadian technology, Canadian innovation, Canadian equipment to rebuild many of the sectors in our economy. Energy, agriculture, mining, IT, and many more are those sectors where Ukraine and Canada has already been started to build the close business ties. The modernized CAFTA provides the crucial framework for this cooperation to prosper. And in fact, some of the long-term agreements, including the agreements in the nuclear sector between Canadian companies and Ukrainian, has already been signed during the war and will start to be implemented since January next year. The newly added chapter with the modernized CAFTA introduced essential provisions for investment protection, laying the groundwork for a sustainable regulatory environment for investors. This is very important for Ukraine and for Canadian companies. This stability and security will serve as a catalyst for increased investment, economic cooperation that will create jobs in both countries. Furthermore, the modernized CAFTA expands our collaboration in the digital trade sphere. The dedicated chapter on the digital trade underscores our commitment to fostering closer relations between companies of this sector. It serves as another example of significant potential for the growth of business ties between Canada and Ukraine. In conclusion, the modernized CAFTA is not just a support to Ukraine. It is a mutually beneficial agreement to support economy and create additional jobs in both countries. It symbolizes enduring strengths of our partnership. By working together, we can create a stronger, more prosperous Ukraine and provide new avenues for Canadian businesses to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Before we start the questions, I just wanted to say that I know I'm speaking on behalf of all parliamentarians that we fully support Ukraine in this unbelievable war of aggression that has been commenced by Russia. We all stand with you. And we're proud of how what Ukraine has done, how strong they've been, how much they've resisted against this Russian invasion. I'm going to use the chair's prerogative to take the first round of questions for the Conservatives. Ambassador, I want to talk briefly about a few things. The trade minister was here yesterday, on Tuesday, and suggested that somehow if you're criticizing aspects of the trade agreement, we're sort of playing into the hands of Vladimir Putin. And I didn't agree with those comments. I disagreed with them strongly. Conservatives have made some criticisms of this trade agreement, but Conservatives have been long-time supporters of Ukraine. In fact, it was a Conservative government under Brian Mulroney that was almost the first country in the world to recognize an independent Ukraine on December 2nd, 1991. I think Poland beat us by about half an hour or 45 minutes to be the first, but we were certainly the first Western country to recognize an independent Ukraine. We have a very large Ukrainian diaspora in Canada that has significantly built the Canada that we know today, that I know all Canadians are proud of. It was a Conservative government that began the first negotiations of the current trade agreement that's in place. That was done under Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And of course, it was under Prime Minister Stephen Harper's Conservative government that Operation Unifier began, which was a significant help to the Ukrainian military. And in fact, some of that help, I'm sure, was helpful in the current conflict. So everyone supports Ukraine across both sides of Parliament. I do think that when I look at the trade agreement, that there are some ways that the trade agreement could perhaps be improved. So as I was doing a little bit of research before I came here today to the committee, it became apparent to me that Ukraine actually has very large natural gas deposits. I think they are the second largest natural gas deposits in Europe. And now from my research, and this numbers might not be completely accurate because I did this research myself, but 1.87 trillion cubic meters of natural gas is the estimated amount of natural gas in Ukraine. And developing that resource would do a lot. I think it could bring in great revenue for Ukraine that needs revenue in a time of war. It could also perhaps be used to export natural gas to Europe, which would certainly cut off a lot of the funds from Vladimir Putin's war machine, take away the funding from him, and it'll make it much harder for him to continue this illegal war in Ukraine. But when I look at the trade agreement itself, there are certainly chapters on investment, but there's no specific chapter in the trade agreement that would talk about, bringing together great Canadian expertise in oil and gas development and helping to build that industry to use that resource in Ukraine. Would you agree with me that either in this trade agreement or in a future trade agreement, another modernized trade agreement, that having some form of detailed cooperation on the development of Ukrainian gas would be a benefit to Ukraine?
Thank you. Indeed, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, energy sector is one of the top 5 priority sectors for Ukraine's rebuilding. It includes wide range of investments, including nuclear, which is over 50% of Ukraine's electricity mix, but also the gas sector, as Ukraine has one of the biggest and most developed infrastructure and gas storage. And indeed, Ukraine has the second biggest proven reserves of natural gas. Also the renewable energy, which is the energy of the future. And as Ukraine is on the way of integrating into EU, with the good news coming just yesterday from the recommendation of European Commission to the European Council to start accession negotiations with Ukraine, that is on Ukraine's file. And indeed, even during the war for the last 2 years, we have delegations from Ukrainian companies in the energy sector coming to the conferences, energy conferences in Canada, and interested in developing cooperation, both in terms of the services, in terms of the equipment in the energy sector.
Thank you, Ambassador. But there's nothing in the agreement that specifically sets out how that cooperation and engagement could take place. That's my review of the agreement. Would you agree with me that there's nothing specifically in the trade agreement to deal with natural gas and the development of that resource?
Being not a deep expert in how the free trade agreements are scheduled, but this is the approach of the free trade agreement that covers institutional basis. The regulation, how the trade of services, the trade of equipment, the trade of goods, the protection of investments, and the other horizontal sectors being settled. So it is an important framework to trade in different ways. And it lays the ground for further specific sector approaches to that cooperation, which, as I mentioned, Ukraine has already started with Canadian companies, and we value this boostering of the cooperation, boostering the trade with the strategic projects, even during the wartime.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We'll now turn to Mr. Arya for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Ambassador, welcome to the committee. On behalf of people of Nepean, I would like to expressly state that we stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine. And we have stood with Ukraine since the start of Russia's illegal war. And we'll stand strong again with Ukraine once this war is done, and we will work jointly towards the rebuilding of Ukraine. The modernized Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement, it supports long-term security, stability, and economic development of Ukraine, while also ensuring high-quality market access for Canadian businesses participating in Ukraine's economic recovery. And this agreement will pave way for high-quality jobs both in Canada and in Ukraine. This signing of this agreement, it also marks a new era in Canada and Ukraine's economic relationship, and will be fundamental to the participation of Canadian businesses in Ukraine's economic reconstruction and recovery from Russia's illegal and unjustified invasion. It is very important for us, even during this war, to maintain the economic relations and strategically prepare for post-war cooperation and economic rebuilding. This includes rebuilding infrastructure. A lot of infrastructure has been destroyed by Russian forces. And we also have to foster entrepreneurship and strengthen Ukraine's agricultural and industrial sectors. Canada has got a good expertise in energy, in technology, in agriculture. I'm glad that you mentioned the digital trade. Can you highlight one or two sectors which you feel are important for Canada's relationship post-war Ukraine?
Thank you. I would just also would like to stress one more time about the kind of a new chapter in the free trade agreement, which will pave the way for fostering the cooperation in the sector, which is the sector of today and the future, which is the digital trade. Both Canada and Ukraine developing the digital services. Ukraine has over 270,000 highly qualified IT specialists in the country. And even during the war and during the blackouts caused by Russian attacks on critical infrastructure, the sector has been growing in 2022. This sector is the major export services from Ukraine. And we believe that there is a mutually beneficial interest of both countries to develop further the digital trade, which will also boost the cooperation in innovation, technology, important to the further productive development of our economic relations.
Once Ukraine wins the war and the rebuilding process starts, infrastructure rebuilding will become the key focus. Can you highlight the kind of things that Canada and Ukraine can work together in rebuilding infrastructure?
Indeed, infrastructure is one of the sectors that suffered the most in terms of the damages, including the critical infrastructure. Just only last winter, 50% of all of the electricity grids, part of the critical infrastructure in Ukraine, has been damaged. And this paves the way for the structural rebuilding of the sectors. And we see and we would welcome Canadian companies to cooperate with Ukrainian in the rebuilding, in the infrastructure sector. And we see the growing interest of Canadian companies. Last year, that the Ukraine's rebuilding conference in Canada was fully crowded. We are waiting in 2 weeks to have the second Ukraine rebuilding conference and to bring both Ukrainian companies and Canadian companies to jointly discuss these priorities and the sectors and also build the economic ties. And that will create both the instrument for Ukraine's rebuilding, but also it will create additional jobs for Canadian business.
You did mention, I would like you to re-emphasize again, the enormous cost that is involved in rebuilding Ukraine. This modernized agreement between Canada and Ukraine opens doors for Canadian businesses for long-term commitment. Rebuilding Ukraine is not a 1 year or 2 year or even a few years project. It's a long-term commitment. If you can kindly mention the total cost that is involved in rebuilding Ukraine and how this agreement paves way for Canadian businesses to be engaged in Ukraine for a long period of time.
Indeed, according to the latest assessment from the experts of the World Bank, the damage that Ukraine economy have because of Russian illegal invasion is over $411 billion across all the sectors. And of course, that is the figure, which is huge. And as I've mentioned, Ukraine's rebuilding will be the single biggest rebuilding on the European continent since the Second World War. And of course, we understand that the biggest contribution to this rebuilding will be done by the private sector. And Ukraine believes that partners in victory, partners in rebuilding. That is the approach to building the business ties. And we believe that CAFTA, modernized CAFTA, is paving the way and a framework to work together, Ukrainian companies, Canadian companies, international financial institutions who now today already are supporting foreign companies who are working in Ukraine with their financing to the capital commitments for the projects. So this is a really great framework to start and to boost the projects between the companies of our countries.
That's your time, Mr. Aria. Je me tourne maintenant, Monsieur Savard.
Mr. Savard Tremblay, the floor is yours for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. And hello, Madam Ambassador. And I'll just give you a moment to put your earpiece in for simultaneous interpretation. Thank you for being with us, Your Excellency, Madam Ambassador. I'd like to join my colleagues by saying that we're in solidarity with you and that we are looking for the best outcome possible for all concerned. Now, this free trade agreement will have a relatively small impact in terms of trade in and of itself. It is a reaffirmation of friendship, however. Now, we know that most of the goods and services were already freely traded under the WTO and previous free trade agreement iteration between Canada and Ukraine. But trade remains limited, that said. However, there are some interesting parts to this free trade agreement. Even though you said you're not an expert in free trade, no worries. If there's a question that you cannot answer, the embassy can, of course, submit a written response to these questions. So please don't worry about that. Now, the 2023 free trade agreement is about 20 million square tons of pork. Now, that's a major market in Canada. Could you please elaborate on Ukraine's needs when it comes to pork?
Thank you, but probably we will follow this question. I'm not now in position to answer that.
Aucun problème.
No worries whatsoever. Please put your earpiece back in. I do have another question to ask you. Now, perhaps you'll be able to answer this question. In the chapter on contracts, I think it's going to be an important chapter. It focuses on rebuilding as part of the peace process. And let's hope that that will happen as quickly as possible. Now, as you rebuild Ukraine, well, we have a lot of engineering companies in Quebec that could help to rebuild Ukraine. For example, dams. We have significant expertise that's recognized on the world stage. Have you assessed your needs? I know that the war isn't over and that this will change over time, but have you assessed what kind of infrastructure needs you'll have and which infrastructure has been hardest hit?
Thank you. Unfortunately, but the scope of the damage in infrastructure is so high that I can definitely say that each sector of infrastructure will require rebuilding, whether it's railways, whether it's the grids, whether it's the roads, whether it's the telecommunication. And of course, as Ukraine's approach to rebuilding is building better, Ukraine will be looking for strong partners with the best technologies, because nobody will rebuild the old-style, inefficient infrastructure. And Ukraine is welcome to companies, both the engineering companies, the construction companies, to participate in the rebuilding and to build the ties. That's why was the support of Business Council of Canada and Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce. We are bringing businesses together on now the annual conferences, but also welcoming Canadian business delegation to visit Ukraine, to meet the companies in Ukraine, including many of the multinational companies who are keep on working in Ukraine, keep on increasing their investments and presence in Ukraine, and to build these ties. And of course, we as an embassy are here to help the companies to build the relations with their Ukrainian counterparts and to help and support these business ties.
Oui, ça je comprends bien.
Well, I do understand that, and I understand the willingness to do this, but that's why I was wondering whether to date you have assessed the infrastructure losses you have endured. As I said, in Quebec, we enjoy globally recognized expertise when it comes to engineering. And so I was wondering if you have a sense, based on what you've heard, of what has been destroyed in this sad war.
I think the exact figure of our estimations for the infrastructure, specifically the infrastructure damages, we'll just forward you as a follow-up of this meeting to be very precise on the exact figure.
Combien de temps, Monsieur le Président?
How much time do I have left, Mr. Chair? 1 minute. Well, I have a question that I think I'll keep for my next round of questioning. So, on that note, do I have any other questions? Let me see. Well, I'll wait for my next round of questions to answer that question. Ask that question.
Merci, Monsieur Savard-Tremblay. We'll now turn to Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Ambassador, for appearing before us. We're really honored to have you here. And again, we pass on our complete solidarity with Ukraine, and we look forward to the next phase of this extraordinarily terrible state of events that you are enduring, and enduring in many ways for us, for the rest of the world. You mentioned in your remarks, and we heard from the Minister earlier, about the need for the investment protection section in the free trade agreement. I'm just wondering if you could maybe expand on what Ukraine feels would, what benefits that would bring, because we were told, and you mentioned it, it was, I think, at Ukraine's request that the old foreign investment protection agreement be rolled into this and modernized. I'm just wondering if you could expand on that.
Thank you, and it's really important question for both companies in Ukraine and in Canada, and Ukraine is looking forward to provide the instrument of investments protection to the risk and to minimize the risk for the companies to invest in Ukraine. That's why it's important that this chapter was renovated, that provided more clarity and more instruments for dispute settlements and more instruments for the companies to, and more assurance about the stability of the regulatory environment in this chapter, so that for the investors and for the Canadian companies looking for the investments in Ukraine, the regulatory framework would be favorable. But also, if we look broader, of course, like the war in Ukraine does not help. Russian war does not help to bring investments in the way that Ukraine needs. And there are many instruments that can further support these investments and the trade, including the export financing, including the insurance of the war risks, that could be supportive to those Canadian companies who are who want and who are looking for the projects in Ukraine with their equipment, with their technology, with their innovations.
Thank you. And I'm just wondering if perhaps you could also talk about this agreement with Canada and other agreements that you are pursuing or might be pursuing, and how this agreement may form a template for those, or whether you are, I think you're seeking to get accession to the CPTPP, joining the EU, things like that. I'm just wondering what avenues are you going down?
Thank you. Indeed, Ukraine is tirelessly working also on the economic front and trade. So since the start of the Russian full-scale invasion, Ukraine already signed the digital trade agreement with United Kingdom. We started negotiation to modernize our free trade agreement with non-European state, EFTA. And we also started negotiations to sign the free trade with United Arab Emirates and continue the negotiations with Montenegro, but also Ukraine. This year, on May, submitted the application for CPTPP, and the negotiation of this modernized CAFTA, I think, helped us at a larger portion to prepare for the negotiations to join CPTPP, and with the rounds of negotiations that we went through the modernized CAFTA, it helped a lot for us to do both the homework, but be also ready and prepare for that negotiations. And that's really was a very helpful for us in our future path to CPTPP. And I would like to thank you, Canada and Canadian government, for the support of Ukraine's submission to CPTPP.
How much? 50 seconds. Okay, I'll just simply ask you, you mentioned Ukraine is pursuing opportunities in the renewable energy sector and presumably investment there. You called it the energy of the future. I'm just wondering if you could expand on that.
Yes, indeed. Developing diverse energy package, which of course includes a big focus on the renewable energy, was Ukraine's strategy both before the full-scale invasion and during that. Wind and solar power, together with the hydropower, are the significant mix of significant part of Ukrainian energy mix. And Ukraine has also good resources to develop both the solar, hydro, and wind power. Even during the war, Ukrainian companies continued to build wind power stations, and over 70 megawatt of the new wind farms have been commissioned during the war, and companies are continuing to invest them. That is also the part of Ukrainian goals into the green transition and rebuilding the energy sector, which will be focused on further development of the renewable sector. When it comes to the hydro power, unfortunately, there are no limits of Russian terrorism, and by Russians blowing up Kakhovka water dam, one of the biggest Kakhovka hydropower plant has been damaged. And Ukraine seeks to rebuild both Kakhovka water dam and building new hydropower facility. And we welcome the start, which is in the form of MOU between Ukrainian hydropower operator and Canadian company, to explore the opportunities to help us to rebuild hydropower facilities in Ukraine.
Thank you.
We'll now turn to Mr. Baldinelli for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and Your Excellency. It's a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for coming forward to bring remarks and answer some questions. You get the sense, and I hope the welcomeness from everyone that is here today, and everyone here and our colleagues can say that we have full support of everyone here for Ukraine, and work with Ukraine when it emerges victorious against, this illegal Soviet aggression. As we discussed earlier, Your Excellency, prior to my election in 2019, I served as the communications manager for the Niagara Parks Commission. As part of my responsibilities at that time, I would deal with the protocol offices of the federal government and global affairs, as well as the embassies when it came to establishing VIP visits to our country and to our region. And one of the highlights of my career prior to my election in 2019 was organizing the visit of President Zelensky and the First Lady, who came in July of 2019. And it was an absolute pleasure to have them come to Niagara Falls and to Niagara Parks. Again, one of the highlights of my career. And Your Excellency, I'm not sure if you've had the opportunity to visit Niagara Falls yet and Niagara Parks, but I extend this open invitation to you now so that hopefully we can also have you there as well. So that is it from my end in terms of welcomes. Building on your comments, where you discuss areas such as infrastructure and energy have been greatly impacted because of the invasion. And they are tremendous areas where they're going to need investments. Just following up on my colleagues' comments from earlier, one way to improve upon the current free trade agreement, perhaps now or in the future, is to discuss such issues and items such as direct energy cooperation direct energy cooperation measures and energy security. For example, Ukraine's electrical grid and energy production and the needs that are going to be of the Ukraine government and people moving forward. I mean, there are issues such as the natural gas deposits, for example, nuclear power as well. I mean, in terms of nuclear power, I believe there are 16 nuclear facilities in the Ukraine. 6 are currently controlled by the Russians, but the remaining there. But the electrical grid as well. You talked about hydro production. I come from a community of 2,200 megawatts of hydro production. So here in the province of Ontario, for example, there is huge potential for opportunities to cooperate in the whole area of energy cooperation, for example, in hydro with Ontario Power Generation. But hydro, not only hydro, Ontario Power Generation is also leaders in the whole area of small modular reactors. And I would just ask the question, would you not think it would be beneficial moving forward if those type of issues could be included in a free trade agreement?
Thank you. Indeed, energy, infrastructure, IT, but also the agri-sector are those sectors where the cooperation need to be, and we are working to build this cooperation. And for the specific areas and the specific project to work, I think the modernized CAFTA lays the broad ground for building up specific cooperation in the areas of mutual interest, both from Canadian companies and Ukrainian rebuilding efforts. And I think that the CAFTA itself builds kind of horizontal framework for the specific cooperation and collaboration in the specific areas where we will welcome further work both between the businesses and the companies and also on the level of government to develop this cooperation.
25 seconds.
I'll cede my time, and I thank you, Your Excellency, for coming forward today.
Great. We'll now turn to Mr. Sidhu for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Kovaleg. I want to thank you for taking the time to join us here today. And let me be very clear, our government has stood by Ukraine, as you know, since day one of this unjust war, and will continue to be there with Ukraine until they win this war. And when that day comes, the task of rebuilding Ukraine's economy will begin. In our discussions, you had mentioned that everyone, including leadership in both Canada, Ukraine, and the business community, is fully in support of this modernized trade agreement. And speaking of the Ukraine Rebuilding Conference you had mentioned next month, many sectors are looking forward to the conference and, of course, the role of this modernized trade agreement with Ukraine to help rebuild their economy. Now, I get the opposition has to do their part, but this fake outrage and delay tactics coming from the Conservative side is not helping Ukraine rebuild at the end of the day. I would also like to add, as per the Canadian press, a news article, and I quote, "A search of parliamentary records suggests Poilievre has never spoken directly about the Ukraine invasion in the House of Commons. It's important to know where the leader of the official opposition stands on this, but I would like to mention our government will continue to be there to help Ukraine rebuild, grow both of our economies, and add jobs, as the Ambassador mentioned in Her Excellency's opening remarks." Now, having said that, what is your vision, Ambassador, for the Ukrainian economy in the next 5, 10 years, and how will this modernized trade agreement between Ukraine and Canada help Ukraine rebuild?
Thank you. I think if we look back in February 21st last year, the prediction of Ukrainians' economy was very hard to do by the brightest economic minds all over the world. If we see the estimates of how Ukrainian economy will perform spring of last year, many of them were too pessimistic. And the results of the last year and the results of the macroeconomic situation in Ukraine this year are better than the expectations. And there are several reasons why. First of all, we value the support that our allies are providing, the financial support our allies are providing to Ukraine, because over 50% of all Ukrainian budget, which are all the revenues that we are collecting as a country by tax and the other government services, are linked to support our defense sector and support our soldiers who are fighting for our country. So this support that Canada provides us in the form of loans is important to help to support people of Ukraine and the ability of the country to move on. But also, as we look on the facts, first time in the history, the country which is actively fighting the aggressor got the 4-year program with IMF, which also is the strong signal of both the commitment of Ukrainian government to further move in the path of the reforms, but also it's an important anchor about the macroeconomic stabilizing in the country. The third important thing is actually I would reiterate yesterday's decision and recommendation from the EU Council to start the negotiations to EU accession of Ukraine. It's a historic way that Ukraine demonstrated that all of the 7 political preconditions to this decision have been made. It really means implementing reforms, including in the sector of justice, in the sector of building transparency in the economy. And also the fourth important thing is about the economic resistance in Ukraine itself. The strong voice of Ukrainian business who are not leaving the country, who are continue to investing, the strong voice of those companies, including Canadian companies, who are continue working in Ukraine. During the war, the Canadian companies continued to invest and increase their investments in Ukraine. This is the signal of the economic resistance of Ukraine's economy. And CAFTA, modernized CAFTA, is the agreement of opportunities to increase economic cooperation, bilateral business ties, and also it is a strong signal for many companies around the world that Ukraine and Canada are able, during the wartime, to negotiate the modern free trade agreement and send the signal to the companies that there is a framework, there is the infrastructure to work on the mutual interesting areas, creating new jobs, supporting export, and supporting the economy of the both countries. Thank you.
Mr. Savard Tremblay for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Madam Ambassador, please know that I find it a pity that you are witnessing a bit of a political sparring match when we should be talking about trade relationships between countries. I just wanted to say that right from off the bat. Now, let's face the fact that, and look at it head on, there has been corruption in Ukraine. This is a real problem, and it's been acknowledged by Ukraine itself. Now, there is a chapter on transparency in combating corruption and accountability of companies and corporations. It doesn't have really many binding clauses, but it calls on these companies to self-regulate. Now, let's just focus on the intention of the chapter, even though it's inadequate to our minds. Could you please tell us what Ukraine has observed and done in the face of corruption to date?
Thank you. And really, Ukraine has done a lot before the war and during the war to increase transparency, increase accountability, and demonstrate the partners that this is one of the important things in Ukraine's reform path. And all the major points of Ukraine's policy towards building transparency has been committed. That was acknowledged both by International Monetary Fund, where we have the separate chapter on transparency, including the measures like renewal of the electronic declarations for all of the public servants in Ukraine during the war. This is probably one of the widest system of electronic declaration of all of the public servants in the world. The second is the new legislation that was just recently adopted to prevent the money laundering, which is one of the most modern now, which is the package of the 7 points, as I mentioned you, with our discussions in the EU Commission. There is another legislation under the way within the next 2 months to increase the capacity of the institutions that are dealing with the investigation of the corruption cases in Ukraine. So this is a very important thing on Ukraine's reform path. And if you look on the assessment of our partners who are deeply working on this file, there is a huge progress. And even the war, Russian war, does not stop Ukrainian government to progress on this file. And of course,
we're over time again. I've been trying, and so we'll now go to Madame Idlout for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome. It's a pleasure to be here to replace my colleague for the time being. And I just wanted to take this opportunity as well to welcome you to the committee and invite you to come to Nunavut. I have a beautiful riding in Canada, probably the most beautiful, and it's the biggest riding in Canada as well. So you'd have a lot of choices to come to visit Inuit homelands. I wanted to ask you about the important chapter on on trade and Indigenous peoples. I was very pleasantly surprised to see that this free trade agreement between Ukraine and Canada is included. And I wondered if you could share with us what your experience or what ideas might be to make sure that Indigenous peoples in both countries have access to the benefits of this agreement.
Thank you. And indeed, it's an important new chapter in our agreement. Ukraine, as Canada, has strong presence of indigenous people. For us, it's the Crimean Tatars who have been significantly oppressed many years, and including since Russian illegal occupation of Crimea in 2014. So the chapter on trade on indigenous has in mind to establish the bilateral committee to facilitate cooperation and to address barriers and challenges that prevent indigenous people to actively engage in the trade. So this chapter will support our bilateral consultations on how to shape the policies and support indigenous people to become more active in the trade, in the business sector in general. It's very important for us because we believe that the Canadian experience through the instrument that the modernized free trade agreement is building will help also Ukraine to shape the policy and to more actively support our indigenous people. But I think it also will help to bring the ties between the indigenous people of Ukraine and Canada. Thank you.
That's all the time. And speaking of the time, looking at the time, we have about 5 minutes. So I'm going to shorten these rounds to 2.5 minutes for Mr. Martel and for Ms. Fortier. Mr. Martel, please go ahead.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here with us. And, of course, I'd like to affirm our entire and complete support for Ukraine. This is crucial. We've always been in favour of free trade. And as you know, the Conservative Party was the first to strike a Canada-Ukraine free trade deal. Now, just a brief observation, if I may. The Liberals are calling us to be united. But as you've noticed, my colleague acted quite divisively a moment ago, and I think it's important to stand together and take a common front. Now, I don't have much time, but that said, I'd like to ask you the following question. Should we have included a detailed chapter on the future rebuilding of the energy sector? We know that the energy sector is significant in Ukraine and there's a certain reliance on Russia, which is worrisome. And Ukraine will need to become energy independent, won't it?
Thank you. Once again, I want to reiterate that I'm not an expert in the way how the free trade agreement is structured, but I would say that the important approach towards Ukraine rebuilding is under the deep development and working in the different sectors. As I mentioned, $411 billion of the damages covers a lot of sectors. Energy is among the top 5 priority for Ukraine, so does the infrastructure, so does the agri-sector, so does the IT, digital tech, military tech, so does the demining. Ukraine is also today working closely with European Union under the first stage of $50 billion package of EU support that will also cover the rebuilding efforts. So I think now there is the room for united efforts to join the allies, Canada, US, European Union, and far more, and to be able to coordinate the efforts, to coordinate the regulation, including the one in the energy sector, so that it will help and facilitate the companies and the government actions within the sectors to engage in the rebuilding, including the further development of the energy sector. Thank you.
Ambassador. Ms. Fortier for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Thank you, Your Excellency, Madam Ambassador, for being here today. As you know, Ottawa Vanier fully supports all of your endeavours. We have fully behind you.
One part of the chapter of facilitating equal access to and the ability to benefit from the opportunities created by the Agreement for Women and Men and support the conditions for women's full participation in domestic, regional, and international trade and investment. I believe that you might be able to share with us how women's participation in this agreement can be a benefit for both countries.
Thank you. Indeed, another chapter that will help the impact not only on the trade, and the agreement and the chapter recognize the importance of promoting women's rights and gender equality, including in business, in small and medium business, and in trade. I can tell it from Ukraine's perspective. It's very important now because the majority of the defenders of Ukraine are men who went to the front line. So today, Ukrainian women have also additional role to participate in economic life, to support the families, and with this horror of war, but we also want to use this as an opportunity to support Ukrainian women to be more active in the economic sector, to engage them, to participate more in business, in trade. Ukrainian government launched, together with the partners, with the support of our partner, the programs that will help Ukrainian women get the education, how to start the business, how to get to the markets. And of course, this chapter, it's not only the symbolical, but it gives both our countries the further tools to develop and support women in the economic activity and in trade between our countries.
I know.
Perfectly on time, because that is
Thank you.
2.5 minutes right on the button.
Merci.
Ambassador, on behalf of everyone here at the committee, thank you so much for coming today. Everyone here is in support of Ukraine in this very, very difficult time. Slava Ukraini. I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Suspend. Sorry, not adjourn. Suspend.
That was fun.
Okay, welcome back for our second hour today. We have a second panel of witnesses. We have Roman Washuk from the Business Ombudsman in Ukraine by video conference. We have Mr. Petichny from the Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce. And we have Mr. I'm going to try this, Mikol from the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. I hope I did okay on those. Wonderful. So we are going to start with Mr. Washuk. Everyone's going to have a 5-minute opening statement. We'll have Mr. Washuk, Mr. Petichny, and Mr. Mikol in that order. So, Mr. Washuk, please go ahead for up to 5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament, I'll make my presentation in English, but I'd be more than happy to answer questions in either official language.
Ambassador of Canada, I was present at the wrap-up of negotiations under the Harper government, the signing of the original CUFTA in 2016 under the Trudeau government, so indeed a cross-party affair at the time, as well as being involved in the rollout and implementation of the agreement in 2017 to 19. And if we look back to 2017 and up until this year at the general trade balance trend lines, we can see Canadian exports first plateauing at a significant surplus versus Ukraine, then dipping and then rebounding by 2021, which is essentially the last full year before full-scale war. Ukrainian exports, which of course we count as Canadian imports, grew steadily, and that was in fact the policy intention, which was to support Ukraine, and that was backed by a trade development project implemented by the Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce and the Conference Board of Canada. So by 2021, as I said, the last full year before full-scale war, trade had settled at an equilibrium of just under 250 million being shipped each way, and that's in terms of goods, with a total turnover nearing $500 million. Ukrainian exports to Canada held steady last year, despite the onset of full-scale war, but have faltered this year, especially as two key contributors, the steel industry and agriculture, have been literally hard hit by bombing, as well as the logistics constraints caused by Russia's Black Sea blockade. Canadian exports have risen sharply this year. If you look at the year-to-date data, in the much appreciated, on the Ukrainian side, form of tanks, guns, and ammunition, as well as UAV components. In fact, if you look at the statistics, 2/3 of this year's record-breaking amount of Canadian exports are, in fact, weapons systems. But things have also started changing in other areas. There's a strategic two-way trade starting in the nuclear power sector. Just in the past couple of months, Ukraine is shipping uranium ore for processing because Ukraine has its own uranium mines for processing by Cameco in Canada, which will in turn provide fuel-grade uranium to Canadian-owned Westinghouse for the manufacture of fuel rods that will go into Ukraine's operational nuclear power plants. This cuts Russia out of the picture and ensures value added for both Canada and Ukraine. And that, I think, answers one of the questions by one of the honorable members in the previous session. Are there ways in which Canada and Ukraine and the trade side can work together to increase Ukraine's energy independence? And this is certainly one. CUFTA modernization is also important in that it is expanding coverage to trade in services and modernizing investment protection. Trade in IT services, especially software development, has been a major part of the Canada-Ukraine economic relationship, with Canada in or near the top 10 of Ukraine's international IT export markets. And this has overall been a win-win situation for Canadian companies, with giving them access to high-level mathematical engineering skills to generate their own product. And it has resulted in, of course, product benefits to Canadians as well. So if you're using Grammarly, for example, to improve your writing output, you're relying on Ukrainian tech. Ukrainian IT companies are also now creating jobs in Canada, not only in software. Ajax Systems, Ukraine's European leader in home and business security systems, has teamed up with Inaxis Systems of Montreal, which is the biggest Canadian independent player in the security space, to provide home and company monitoring solutions across Canada. Canadian investment, now also to be better protected under the agreement in Ukraine, is modest, but it's prominent in some market segments. Fairfax Financial, known to you no doubt, is the undisputed leader in the Ukrainian insurance market, owning 3 of the top 10 companies, also expanding its presence in the agri-food sector. And perhaps counterintuitively, both of these business units are continuing to grow, because as Ukrainians moving to and from shelter in countries abroad need auto and health insurance, ensuring that market grows, and people home and abroad still need to be fed. My current day job as business ombudsman for Ukraine is monitoring and ensuring the implementation of Ukrainian legislative safeguards for business, handling complaints from individual businesses, and making systemic recommendations for improvements. And that's supported by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and a consortium of Western countries. The imminent opening of EU accession negotiations...
I have to interrupt. You're at 5.5 minutes. I apologize, but we're going to have to move on now. And so we will move to Mr. Potichny for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, as President of Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce, I stand before you today to underscore the profound importance of modernizing the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement, emphasizing the key changes needed to the prosperity of both nations and highlighting the critical role in place that Ukraine's post-war recovery and reconstruction, as well as its potential to engage Canadian companies in this vital endeavor. The original CAFTA established in 2017, and we have been a bit involved. And as former Ambassador Mr. Vashchuk mentioned, we were part of the project CIIT, as well as had the old CAFTA, as I call it, has been a symbol of economic cooperation and partnership. But modernization of this agreement is crucial to reflect the changing dynamic of the global economy, as well as the challenges Ukraine is currently facing due to Russian full-scale invasion. I also would like to underscore that the old trade agreement had main focus in the area of tariff reduction and elimination, and it has done a great job, and most of them are now these tariffs are removed, and I think end of February, all of them will be removed. But there are important new chapters that are in this modernized free trade agreement, and a lot of things are on trade and services that have been missing before. IT has been already mentioned, and quite a few Ukrainian companies even opened offices already in Canada. Finances, non-tariff barriers, e-commerce, environmental labor standards. And I would like to just underscore that trade and services and finances are going to be very crucial in rebuilding of Ukraine. We're talking about probably the largest reconstruction project in the world. The numbers that are being thrown around now are $750 billion to perhaps even $1 trillion. It is giving a huge opportunity not to just help Ukraine, but also huge opportunities for Canadian companies to take part in that. And it's not a secret anymore, because right after signing of the modernized free trade agreement by President and Prime Minister of Canada, there was an MOU signed between a known Canadian company, Aiken, and Uker Hydro Energo, which is producer of hydro energy in Ukraine. These kind of projects are multi-billion projects, and it will happen, and they will be done much easier and faster with this modernized CAFTA. The modernization of CAFTA holds a unique potential to engage Canadian companies in the reconstruction of Ukraine. Canada has a history of providing support and assistance to Ukraine, and this is a pivotal moment to further strengthen that partnership. By modernizing the agreement, we can create incentives and opportunities for Canadian businesses to invest in Ukraine's reconstruction effort. This will only bring much needed capital to the country, but also foster technological transfers and knowledge sharing that can accelerate Ukraine's post-war recovery. In conclusion, the modernization of the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement with the key changes outlined is crucial for Ukraine's post-war recovery. These changes will fortify our friendship and partnership while sending a strong signal to the world about our commitment to responsible and ethical trade and services practices. Moreover, it has the potential to engage Canadian companies in the crucial task of reconstruction in Ukraine, fostering economic revitalization and reinforcing the bond between our nations. I urge all of you to support this initiative, recognizing its vital role in Ukrainians' recovery and opportunity for Canadian companies. Thank you very much.
Potichny, and now we'll turn to Mr. Mikolshishin for 5 minutes as well.
Thank you. So I wish my esteemed co-panelists were here in person with me, but I know we'll see each other at the Rebuild Ukraine conference in Toronto on the 21st and 22nd, and I invite all of you to join us there as well. It's my honor to be here today representing the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, which acts as the federation and the voice of Canada's Ukrainian community. Since 1940, we've been working to lead, coordinate, and represent our community and shape Canada's social, economic, and political policies. We're very grateful to all Canadians for their generous support of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people at this time as Russia wages a genocidal war on Ukraine and its people. We will never forget the kindness that Canadians have shown Ukraine, including sheltering more than 200,000 Ukrainians in Canada. Yakuyama. Russia's war against Ukraine has had devastating human costs. Tens of thousands have been killed and thousands more wounded. Millions have been displaced from their home, including coming here to Canada, which has caused the greatest humanitarian disaster in Europe since World War II. Russia's war has also had devastating economic consequences for Ukraine. Its GDP contracted by about 30% in 2022. And as you've heard today, estimates on the reconstruction costs vary, but they all involve the number billion or trillion. While destroying Ukraine's infrastructure and the homes of its people, Putin's Russia has been unable to destroy that which it hates most: an independent Ukraine and a pluralist Ukrainian nation united in its aspirations to join the European community. Just this week, the EU Commission made the historic determination that Ukraine is ready to open EU accession negotiations. The negotiation process is long and complicated, but Ukraine's path to EU membership is now irreversible. Russia's colonialist delusions have failed. It is in this context that the modernization of the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement is so important, and why the UCC strongly supports the swift adoption of this modernized agreement. We believe that Ukraine's further integration with the EU, with NATO, in which Canada can be of great assistance, is the key to Ukraine's future success. This future success of Ukraine is both in our national security interest and the economic interest here for Canada and for all of our allies, including in the United States and Europe. As Canada also has a free trade agreement with the EU, the adoption and implementation of standards that apply across the board are important for Ukraine's economic development, strengthening of the markets, and trade ties, as the ambassador said, to rebuild better. 3 main points that we believe are critical. First, ensuring that Export Development Canada actively supports Canadian investment in Ukraine with a full suite of products and export insurance. Canada risks being left behind if we don't join other national export credit agencies and multinational institutions, such as the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the American International Development Finance Corporation, the British International Investment Company, and others that are providing some certainty to investors from their country. Second, we strongly support legislative and regulatory changes that would allow for the seizure and repurposing of Russian state assets and Russian oligarch assets currently frozen in Western banks and institutions. For example, some of you may have heard about Bill S-278 in the Senate. We encourage this committee to examine this issue and see how it would impact both trade with Ukraine and post-war reconstruction efforts. Finally, most importantly, discussions about increasing trade and economic activity must rely on the Ukrainian victory, which will be the ultimate economic and trade benefit for Canada and Ukraine. As long as Russia continues to wage war, the human cost will rise, as will the economic cost, and the cost of lost potential. So we urge all MPs in this committee and in Parliament to support greater investments in Canadian arms and armament manufacturing, to support substantial increases in military aid from Canada to Ukraine, which will lead to this Ukrainian victory. There will be in the future important opportunities for cooperation in the defense and security sectors, joint ventures, joint production, and so forth that will be developed. The reality is, even after a victory, Ukraine will have to be well armed. Canada can help in this. One day, I hope to appear before this committee where we can discuss further Canadian investment opportunities in a Ukraine that is peaceful in its internationally recognized borders and firmly anchored in the European Union as a whole free and peaceful nation. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. We will turn to the first round to Monsieur Martel pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'd like to thank you for being here today so that we can have a discussion. I'd like to first direct my questions at Mr. Washok. I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly, sir. Now, Mr. Washok, the first agreement in 2015, what was your role at that time with that free trade agreement?
Moi, j'étais ambassadeur.
Well, I was the ambassador for Canada in Ukraine at the time. So you didn't take part in the negotiation itself. Response. There were professional negotiators, free trade and negotiators from Ottawa who participated in that negotiation and the details thereof. But I was, of course, kept fully abreast of what was occurring throughout the negotiations. And at the tail end, there was a little bit of horse trading that needed to be done, especially to keep Canada's supply in the dairy sector, for example. But it was really the policy and negotiation team from the department that played the main role. Now, you were aware of what was going on in Ukraine. Were you concerned that Ukraine was reliant in terms of energy on Russia? Did you have misgivings in that regard? I don't think the whole issue of energy was front and center in those discussions. Canada was not a potential supplier of energy to Ukraine at the time. And nuclear energy wasn't really present at that time either. So it was more about goods and not energy per se. Now, let's turn our attention to today. We have a number of misgivings and questions about the new free trade agreement. On Tuesday, we learned from government officials that the issue of energy security was not even raised in the discussions to modernise the free trade agreement. Now, given the current geopolitical context that you're fully aware of and that has changed since the last negotiations, obviously, it would strike me that it would be crucial to talk about energy security. Response. Well, of course, that is a key factor, and I'm seeing that some progress has been made vis-à-vis nuclear energy. Do you believe that it would have been good to have a paragraph or further detail in the free trade agreement on the energy sector itself, because we can't see it anywhere in the modernising document? Would that have been helpful? We know that there's a lot of detail about certain sectors, but nothing whatsoever about energy. Response. Well, I'm no longer privy to what goes on in the department, and I left the Foreign Affairs Department and several years ago. Now, for example, natural gas and oil. Those are commodities that are really rarely subject to trade deals. They're sold in the international marketplace, and there's not really a need to have a specific chapter dealing with those commodities in free trade agreements, because they are already treated in a free manner in terms of trade globally. But I'm not an expert when it comes to the energy sector, so I'm not quite sure whether it would have been possible to include something in that regard.
We'll now turn to Mr. Sidhu for 6 minutes.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thanks to our witnesses for joining us here today on this very important discussion on the modernization of the trade agreement. I met with the UCC recently, and it's a well-respected voice in the Ukrainian diaspora and the business community, and your advocacy is critical to help Ukraine rebuild, but also to assist both our economies and sectors create jobs, both here in Canada and Ukraine, as we heard from the ambassador earlier today. I'd like to know, kind of from the UCC, how important is it to you at the UCC and the business community to have this modernized trade agreement adopted without delays?
Well, as I said, I think Mr. Petici can speak to it more specifically through the Chamber of Commerce. Every week, every month, we're hearing from companies in Ukraine and companies in Canada that are eager to do business or are doing business and want to expand. Many of those companies will be at the conference in Toronto or were at the conference last year. And I think with the influx of more than 200,000 Ukrainians in Canada, those person-to-person ties have also increased greatly. So I think that we see, as the ambassador said earlier, that Ukraine has a priority on economic growth. The 30% GDP loss is a huge hit, but that notwithstanding, the Ukrainian economy continues, the banking system continues, and as our other speakers have said, there's a lot of potential, but I think the potential, as I said, is all contingent on the war ending in a positive way for Ukraine, which will then allow the assessment of the exact dollars and figures. But I think that Ukraine is eager to conclude this as a step forward in its negotiations on a global level.
Thank you for sharing those insights. Mr. Wachak, turning to you, I really enjoyed the insights you provided in terms of technology companies and mutual cooperation in both Ukraine and Canada. I know your opening remarks got cut off, but I'm hoping if you'd like to finish some of those, I'm really intrigued to hear what more you have to say.
I had another sentence or two, and it was focused on actually the modernizing impact on Ukraine of the beginning of accession talks to the European Union, but then also of provisions of the modernized CIIT. So essentially, Ukraine will, within probably 4 or 5 years, be inside the EU. It's already largely inside the single market. It will be soon within the EU's common mobile roaming zone, which means it'll be a way cheaper place to have a mobile phone than Canada. But it means that it will be part of our broader sort of Euro-Atlantic system. And I think you need to think of CUFTA being modernized, yes, but ultimately it may in fact be a transitional measure, because if Ukraine succeeds in acceding to the EU, it will be part of CITA, the Canada-EU trade agreement, by likely 2030. But that also means that harmonization of standards, which is very high in CETA and is being upgraded in CUFTA, will make it better and easier and for Canadian companies to trade goods and services that are interoperable with Ukraine, because they're designed to be interoperable with the EU. So Ukraine's EU accession also makes it an easier market to work with for Canadian companies.
And thank you for those insights. And turning back to the UCC, we mentioned agriculture and the importance that agriculture or technology can play as we move forward to help Ukraine rebuild. Can we speak to that sector and you know, some of the importance around the sector and maybe some examples of how Canada and Ukraine are working together?
General messages on the grain sector is a place where I don't want to get into specific naming of companies, but there's a lot of historical investment from Canada in Ukraine on grain transportation, grain storage. Obviously, the Black Sea blockade by Russia has put a major impact on all of Ukraine's grain production. The countries are very similar in terms of their agriculture industries, and what we've seen is big interest from Ukraine about technology and equipment export to Ukraine. Unfortunately, I think in the short term, Ukraine is now in the top landmined countries of the world, and agricultural land is primarily affected. And so I think we've all seen that in some very brave Ukrainian farmers that are continuing to try to plant, even though they know that there could be landmines in their own fields. So I think in the short term, we need to help Ukraine become landmine free. And then I know there are already major Canadian and multinational agriculture companies in Ukraine that have facilities who've been hit, who are looking to rebuild and expand those and see the potential, again, as Mr. Vasyuk said, in the next 4 to 5 years of what could be in a peaceful, de-landmined agricultural sector.
How much time do I have, Mr. Chair? 5 seconds. Oh, well, just thank you for your insights. Really appreciate it.
which is now 0. And we'll turn to Monsieur Savard Tremblay pour 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. My first question will be directed at Mr. Ponishi, but first, thanks to all the witnesses again. Mr. Ponishi, when you came in February 2022, we were studying trade between Canada and Ukraine. You were quite critical about ESDC, and you said that it was difficult to get the money that was available and that they had their work cut out for them. Now, since the war hit, has the situation changed at all?
Sorry, thank you for the question, but sorry, I didn't quite understand. The money was difficult to...
moi, je me fie à ce que vous aviez dit à ce moment.
Well, I'm just relying on what you said back then, but the money from the EDC, Economic Development Canada.
Yes, okay, thank you. Yes, absolutely. There's definitely different tone in discussing business in Ukraine these days. I feel that EDC is much more open to looking at different solutions. We had actually meetings with them in few cities across Canada. They even did a sort of a tour across Canada to meet with businesses that are interested to do something in Ukraine and ask them direct questions. What do you need? What are you looking at? And we certainly have them participating in in Rebuild Ukraine conference last year, and this year they're bringing a whole team and participating in the panel. So I certainly see a huge difference. They're also talking about, besides just some of the credits and funds available for business, they're also looking into perhaps some kind of insurance. I don't want to call it war insurance, because at that time when we suggested to look at something that American companies are doing, they said we're different than the American companies. But I know they're looking at some issues on the insurance, possibilities of insurance for businesses as well. So yes, huge difference.
Merci.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Washuk. You are the ombudsperson for business in Ukraine, and there's a chapter that the government is referring to a lot: transparency and combating corruption, accountability of companies and corporations. There are provisions on the transparency of companies that were added. However, they are strictly on a voluntary basis. They're not binding. There's no body that monitors what's done and sanctions it. There's incentives for companies to adopt guidelines and best practices and principles that are well known across the world when it comes to social and corporate responsibility, but they remain purely voluntary. Now, earlier the ambassador talked about what Ukraine is doing to combat corruption since the onset of war, and there seems to be a real headway that's being made. But is it really necessary from the Ukrainian government do more? Well, it's a process, isn't it? And there's an anti-corruption architecture that's been constructed, if you will. There are detectives, there is an agency to prevent corruption, there is an anti-corruption court, and there are British and Canadians and Europeans who were involved in selecting the judges who sit on that court. They were vetted very closely, and that wasn't voluntarily at all. It was quite a stringent process. There's an institution like mine that also exists, i.e. an independent arm's-length institution that is funded by the European Reconstruction and Development Bank, and business persons can turn to that bank, as well as business people domestically in Ukraine, in order to have their rights upheld if they find or if they consider that governments or municipalities have in some way wronged them. So that is an incentive for greater transparency. For example, I myself, as a Canadian citizen, a former ambassador to Canada, there's a certain communication with the police, the economy department, and there's a Louis Dreyfus example, for example, Shell. So I think that we're far from perfection here, but I think that we're heading in the right direction, and that's quite encouraging.
Alors, je vais vous remercier.
Well, thank you very much for that.
Okay, so we will turn to Ms. Idlout for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My first question will be to Roman Wachuk. I'll be asking you regarding the Canada-Ukraine FIPA that had been entered into force back in 1995. I understand that the modernized CUFTA would suspend the Canada-Ukraine FIPA for as long as the modernized CUFTA remains in force. Could you describe for us how this modernized CUFTA would affect Canadian investors?
As I understand it, the Foreign Investment Protection Agreement of 1995, 96 was state of the art for 25, 30 years ago. International trade law and international investment protection has advanced considerably. The new provisions take that into account. They take into account the international governance changes that have occurred. They take into account the way money flows have been modernized, have been made more electronic. So basically, it's kind of getting up to speed with the way business operates now. Basically, a kind of going from a checkbook world to a digital transfer world, but having the governance instruments in place to deal with that. It also provides new opportunities for Canadian investors to talk to the government of Ukraine when they feel their interests are being impinged upon. And again, what isn't in CUFTA but exists is our institution to which Canadian companies, along with any other companies, can appeal if they feel that their interests are being disregarded or are being eroded.
Thank you. Could you describe what the similarities and the differences are between the modernized agreements investment provisions and the Canada-Ukraine FIPA?
I'm not myself an expert on investment protection agreements, so I can't give you a kind of article by article comparison, but can certainly tell you that the Canadian trade and investment negotiators have upped their game considerably. And what we've done is we have taken the experience we've gained from agreements like first NAFTA, then the renewed agreement with the US and Mexico, but especially the Canada-Europe trade agreement, and built many of those elements into modernized CUFTA.
Thank you so much. My next question will be to Ihor. I'm sorry I can't say your last name, and I'm sorry if I pronounce your first name incorrectly as well. But I'd like to ask you regarding your appearance before this committee back in February 2022, where you had made recommendations for a renewed CUFTA, one of which was, in quotes, establish reform benchmarks in law enforcement, judicial and taxation systems, and clear criteria for measuring reform progress. Can you explain to us if this has been achieved?
Thank you. You got my name perfectly. The largest way that Canada has been helping Ukraine with judicial reform has been through programs such as Mr. Wischuk described, the court, the anti-corruption agencies, police reform, many programs through the International Development Office, which have been building both transparency and accountability within the Ukrainian government, as well as helping Ukraine move towards EU ascension. So I don't have a specific insight into my remarks from the past versus this modern CUFTA, but I can say that the largest overall pattern that we see happening is reform in terms of all legislative processes, really driven by the goal of EU ascension. And that has been supported by Canada's international development program for many years. So we want to continue that. And again, I don't have a list of specific initiatives, but there are more than a few in Ukraine that are making a deep impact in the way that corruption is dealt with by the legislature and by the police.
You're leading up to my final question to you. We know that corruption has a very negative impact on trade, and we know that President Zelensky is working hard to uproot corruption in Ukraine. How successful has been, and what more needs to be done?
I think, as the ambassador said, that Ukraine, while fighting a war, while trying to join the EU, is continuing to reform its own house, to put its house in order, particularly with the European Union guidelines and regulations that it needs to meet. As former ambassador said, it's a process, and there's an architecture of a system that's there. I think we've all seen the high-profile dismissals of Ukrainian officials by the president of Ukraine when there are examples of corruption to make the point that it will not be tolerated. And I think that we see progress, and we need to continue to support our partners in Ukraine on that progress.
So we'll now move to the second round. Mr. Baldinelli for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the witnesses for being here this afternoon. I'm going to begin with Mr. Waschuk, former ambassador to the Ukraine. Thank you for being here this afternoon. And my one colleague allowed you the opportunity to kind of finish off your 5-minute period of remarks because, unfortunately, you ran out of that allotted time. And you started to talk about the modernizing aspects of not only CUFTA, but also you discussed about the moves of Ukraine towards ascension to not only CITA, but closer relationships and ties and eventual becoming part of the EU. When do you, just following up on those discussions, when do you see something like this coming to fruition?
Well, we had yesterday the announcement by the European Commission that they are recommending the opening of negotiations with Ukraine on accession. So that's things starting to get real here. That recommendation needs to be ratified by the European Heads of Government Summit, which will be on the 14th of December. And in the usual EU fashion, there'll probably be some horse trading around that, but likely to be approved. Then by next March, we are supposed to have an agreed negotiating framework between the two sides, and then negotiations. Now, some countries have been stuck in negotiations for decades. What we can see, though, is that key countries in the EU, especially Germany and France, have now thrown their weight behind Ukraine, essentially thinking it's better to have Ukraine inside the tent than next door to the tent. Ukraine in 2014 signed an association agreement with the EU, which gave it some of the advantages of the single market, but not all of them, and no co-determination. Now it is on, the decision is it should be on the inside. And once, especially those two big countries have switched to that position, and that was also reflected by German Chancellor Scholz a couple of weeks ago at a meeting with the Ukrainian Prime Minister and Economy Minister, saying to German business, when you are investing in Ukraine, you are investing in a future EU member country within our system. So that's also a message to Canadian business. So I would say 2030, which is 7 years from now, 6.5, is realistic. Some Ukrainians are more optimistic, but personally, I think they need a transition period because just like Canada with the FTA with the US and then NAFTA, you need transition periods so that parts of your economy that aren't ready for full integration and competition with French companies, Spanish companies, German companies that have deeper pockets, so they don't get steamrolled in the process. So I would say 2030 is realistic.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. And yeah, I think that key word that you used is it becomes really, this CUFTA agreement will then become a transition document as ascension to CITA begins. And it's kind of interesting to note that there's no mention of carbon tax or carbon leakage in CITA, to the best of my knowledge and that of my colleagues in our review of the document. But in the interim, and that transition period, we're going to be talking and vitally important about the rebuild of Ukraine. The ambassador who was here earlier indicated at a minimum $400 billion is going to be needed. So would it not, therefore been prudent then to have included chapters related specifically to the reconstruction and rebuilding of Ukraine as we move on that transition towards a sanction to CITA. But in the short term, the reconstruction and the rebuilding that will be required in Ukraine is hugely important. So have we missed an opportunity by not including chapters specifically in regards to energy cooperation, energy security?
I think overall the modernized framework generally allows for Canadian companies to participate effectively. Again, whether a separate energy security chapter would have made any great difference, that would actually depend on Canada's capacity to be a net provider. And as we know, unfortunately, we haven't made the internal federal, provincial, and other arrangements to become a major exporter of even things like liquid natural gas to Europe. That same Chancellor Scholz discovered that on his trip to Canada last year. So having a separate chapter on something that Canada domestically isn't quite ready to deliver on, not sure how that would have worked out.
Opportunity.
So
I'm gonna have to interrupt. We're over time. We'll turn to Mr. Aria for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is to Mr. Roman Waschek. With your knowledge and experience in Europe, the plans for Ukraine to join European Union, one of the things about European Union is that everybody has to agree. We have seen what happened for the long negotiations with Turkey. Finally, Turkey has to withdraw its intention or its application or interest in joining European Union. With countries like Hungary being part of European Union, how confident are you that Ukraine will be able to join European Union someday?
Well, I think I mentioned the word horse trading, and that is a long European tradition. Turkey, very large, very dynamic, very populous economy that seemed to be a sort of a step too far for the Europeans. Ukraine already, for example, is part of the auto parts manufacturing pipeline that goes through Poland and then into final assembly plants in places like Germany. So it's already linked into the broader economic system, and under what the Europeans offered it after the outbreak of full-scale war, has largely unrestricted access to the single market. And of course, Ukrainians, millions of them, have received temporary status in protected status in EU countries. So in a way, it's almost like millions of Ukrainians having an EU 101 course that they sort of involuntarily got because of this outbreak of war. So I think actually Ukraine now getting this prospect will actually help other countries like the countries of the Western Balkans to move into the European Union more quickly. The EU itself was stuck and wasn't sure what to do, but what they've realized is that with Russia going aggressive and going expansionist, they need to get locked down, if you will, countries like Ukraine, Moldova, but also Serbia, Albania, countries like that, for their own good. So this is, I think the German foreign minister said it yesterday, this is not just an economic decision, it's a geopolitical response to what's happening.
At that time, I understand the horse trading that you mentioned. Turkey, I don't know what was traded with Turkey that it agreed for the Sweden inclusion into NATO. My specific question was a country like Hungary playing a spoil sport here. And if you can touch on that. And the second question is that the infrastructure destruction is enormous in Ukraine, and Canada can play a real good role in rebuilding the infrastructure. That requires a long-term commitment from Canadian businesses and Ukraine too. Do you think this modernized Canada-Ukraine free trade agreement will help Canadian businesses have a long-term interest in Ukraine?
Yes, thank you. Yes, Hungary is a spoiler. It, however, has often made quite outrageous statements, mostly about what it sees as protection of Hungarian minority rights, but really is kind of slightly irredentist stuff, but has then agreed in the spirit of horse trading to, let's say, more European subsidies for this or that, and then their super principled position goes from veto to, oh, we'll just abstain on that. So that's one aspect. Another is, indeed, I think Canadian companies need to be well positioned. CUFTA modernized will help. And I think also a kind of triangular partnering with European countries, especially neighboring countries, will be helpful, because that provides you with both a logistical base and a secure regulatory and simply safe base for operations. I've spent quite a lot of time in Poland in the last 18 months, and there's a lot of interest from the Polish business community in reconstruction, but also in partnering with countries from further abroad in, finding who's got comparative advantages in what areas. Interestingly, there's a discussion of EDC. The Polish export credit.
Mr. Waszak, I'm going to have to interrupt. We're over time again, and we're getting very near the end. We have two more questions. So we have Monsieur Savard Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, and then Madame Idlaut for 2.5 minutes. Mr. Savard Tremblay, please go ahead.
Oui, monsieur.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Michal Chichon. When you appeared before the committee in February 2022, you said that the instability and Russian aggression led to an exodus of private interests. And that was the upshot. That was even before the war. Now that there is war, there's even more aggression. Can you please update us on the situation and that flowing of capital?
Sure. Well, I think we saw in the international security situation in December and January of 2022 was quite unstable, as we saw Mr. Putin increase his troop numbers near the border. I think up to 8 to 10 million individuals fled. Those were people that were working and continue to work, some of them, but also found new jobs in the European Union. I've been at some meetings about the international refugee situation, which shows that there are millions of Ukrainians returning to Ukraine despite the situation, partially because Ukraine has air defense in some of almost all of its major cities, and with Canadian support is able to take out most of the drones that Russia attacks it with. So there has been a stability based on the numbers of people that left, but are now returning. I've heard into the millions returning back into Ukraine to live and work and contribute to the economy.
But when it comes to investments, you referred to workers, but back then you talked about private investors that had an impact on the credit markets. What about that? What has changed there?
Well, again, the GDP has gone down 30%. There is an unstable situation in terms of the security, but I would say that from what we understand, there are many multinational companies, particularly from Europe, from Japan and other places, that are looking at the long-term horizon for Canada-Ukraine perspectives in terms of the future.
Thank you very much. We'll now do our last round of questionings. Madame Idlaut for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be asking my question to Mr. Petichny. I'm glad to see, as I mentioned to the ambassador in the first panel, that there's chapters on Indigenous peoples and trade. I wonder if you could share with us how this chapter could increase access and to the benefits of this agreement for Indigenous peoples in Ukraine and Canada.
Thank you very much for the question. I guess we didn't have anything like this before, and talking about our membership as members of Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce, and we have about 100 companies as members from Ukrainian side and about 100 companies from Canadian side. We certainly have few companies that have Indigenous people involved in the business. So I think that will definitely clarify and help expanding even more for Indigenous people, especially on the Canadian side. I know there's some companies that are looking at doing some business in Ukraine right now that involves Indigenous people. So I think it's only positive that we have that clarified and clear in the free trade agreement.
My final question to you as well, a similar question, because it's also great to see in this agreement regarding gender. And I wonder if you could explain what the benefits will be for ensuring that we consider gender in this agreement.
Yes, thank you for the question. Absolutely, it will help and assist. I mean, we were running with Conference Board of Canada the CIIT project, Canada-Ukraine Trade and Investment Support Project, which fell under the old free trade agreement. And I remember even during that project, we had to pay a large attention to gender equality in business, and this was especially for small and medium businesses. We actually had to mark everything from every conference, from every meeting, from every deal, how many women and girls were involved in these transactions or in these things happening. And now that we have even more expansion on the gender equality in the modernized free trade agreement, I think it's only positive. Ukrainian women are very much active in business and really want to get involved, especially the younger generation, and they always look forward to working with Canadian businesses that have women as leaders or managers or bosses.
We will conclude the meeting. I want to thank all of the witnesses for coming today and sharing their valuable insights. With that, I will adjourn the meeting.